we get started, I would like before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsor, Bank 5, who has been sponsoring our Bank 5 Small Business series. And I see Jennifer Dooling is here. Jennifer, if you'd like to say a couple words, feel free to join right now.
I apologize. I wasn't planning on saying a few words, and I appreciate the introduction. And all I can say is Bank 5 absolutely is very passionate about small business. We're here to help the small businesses grow and thrive. That's part of our mission. And you know, I know that that Greg has a great topic to cover today, which is around bank fraud and just fraud in general for small businesses and how to counteract it. And you know, we want to be a bank that helps small business manage their business day to day. And so I'll turn it back over to you, but thank you for the introduction.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. Sorry, I didn't mean to just drop it on you.
No, that's okay. I was interested in the topic, so I wanted to listen in. Thank you.
Glad to hear it. So our speakers today, I'll start with John Danahy. John's the co-owner of Digital Tech Partners, Inc., better known as DTP. He's the managing partner of systems engineering for DTP, is a laser focused on providing expert cybersecurity services to businesses in regulated industries. Most recently, he received credentialing from the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Accreditation body. Try saying that a few times as fast. As a registered practitioner, at the present time, there are only 1,700 in the world. Prior to starting DTP, John served as department head of information technology systems engineering, as well as department head of systems infrastructure and operations for MITRE Corporation, a veteran who received a Bronze Star for Meritorious Service and Order of St. Barbara, and a retiree from the Massachusetts National Guard. His service to the nation and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts spans 23 years. John holds a Bachelor of Science degree in marketing, an M.B.A, and is currently a candidate for the Master of Science Systems Engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. So John Danahy. Our second speaker is Greg Thorin. Greg recently joined Bank 5 as the Information Security Officer. His prior roles included cybersecurity engineer, IT manager, lead NOC administrator, network administrator, and network engineer. Greg has over 15 years of experience and broad knowledge in computer information systems. Since joining the bank, he has helped enhance their information security functions and implemented an internal cybersecurity training program. So ladies and gentlemen, John Danahy and Greg Thorin, and I'll turn it over to you folks.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate the introduction. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit. I put together a little bit of a presentation really surrounding cyber tips and different ways you can combat cybercrime. But before I get into that, I wanted to talk about a few statistics that I had. From a small business fraud perspective, small businesses have been ranked highest in fraud frequency from the ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And small businesses have a median annual loss of $164,000. And the biggest contributing factor to that is a lack of internal controls. So with that said, I'll talk about a couple things that we can put in place that will help combat that. The first thing is passwords. It's always the more passwords you have in place, the better. Think 12 or more. And special characters, upper and lowercase letters can help. And then change frequency, especially if you suspect suspicious behavior, you want to go ahead and change your password. And try not to use the same password more than once. I know, I think everybody's guilty of doing that. We put it in one website and then we end up using it across a bunch of them. But remember, if somebody gets that password, they've now got it for all the different sites that you use. So just be careful of that. The next one is multi-factor authentication. It adds a layer of security to a standard password. It adds you can use a PIN, or you can use a password or an approval on phone. I think many of us have probably seen this as well. Things like Google Authenticator are used commonly. Duo is another one that's widely used. So that's a really, really important way to help protect your account. Another thing is firewalls and antivirus. Firewalls will help out screen out attackers and viruses and other malicious activity. And you want to make sure that you install and update your antivirus software on a regular basis. If you're not updating your virus software, the virus definitions aren't getting updated, so they're not going to be aware of a new virus. Only use antivirus from trusted vendors and just run one on your device. You don't need to run multiple antivirus tools. Another important thing to do is to make sure that you're updating your endpoints. Turn on automatic system updates, third-party applications. As soon as something's available, update that. I know sometimes it is a little bit of a challenge to get these devices updated because it does require maintenance windows and sometimes it requires a little bit of downtime. But this is so important, so critically important. Phishing scams, very, very common. Think before you click. They come through a few ways. They'll come through SMS, which is called the smishing attack. They come through phone, which is phishing, and then email. I'm sorry, yeah, they come through the phone, like a phone call, which would actually be like a vishing attack with a V, and then email, which would be a phishing attack. So you want to make sure that you double check the URL with whatever messages that you receive. There's a couple ways you can do this. Hovering over the link with your mouse will actually tell you the URL you're being directed to. Double check it. Think before you click on things. Just make sure that, are you expecting this email? Is this something you should be clicking on? Think before you click is the biggest thing I can say from phishing perspective. Unattended devices. This is easy for somebody to just sit at your desk and stop working without you, as soon as you walk away. So lock your computer before you walk away. A handy little shortcut key that I frequently use is bottom left-hand corner of your keyboard is the window key. If you press window key and L, that'll quickly lock your workstation. And then back up your data. So if you become a victim of something, having a good backup is your guarantee that you're going to get your data back, and then test it. So it's great that you're backing up, but you really want to make sure that your backups are working. So periodically do a restore, open the restore, make sure that file that you've restored actually opens. That ensures the integrity of the data. Because if you're backing up and your data is corrupted, your backup's not doing you much good. Mobile device securely, you want to make sure that you're creating a difficult passcode or a PIN code. Only install apps from sources that you trust and know. Be careful with sending personal information over text messages. And again, updates. I can't say this enough. As soon as updates become available, it's important to install them, whether it be a Microsoft update, a phone update, third-party updates. A lot of times, not only are these updates enhancements for the software, but they're also a lot of security fixes in those. So it's critically important to install those. And then you want to be careful with public Wi-Fi. You make sure if you are using a public Wi-Fi to use a VPN. It ensures that the data is encrypted when you have VPN turned on. And then again, multi-factor authentication, I'm circling back on that. Make sure you use that when you're using VPN as well. And then spam filtering. Spam filtering is a way to catch potential spam from getting delivered to your inbox. It's relatively low cost with a small number of users. So what happens is if somebody sends you an email, the email first will go through this spam filter, and it will then look at it and make a decision. Is this good or is this not good? And then it will make a decision and either send it to your email or it will hold the email and not deliver it to you. So this is really good at catching spam or phishing emails. We use something called ForcePoint at Bank 5, which works really well. And then the last thing that I have here is a regular security awareness training is really important as well, just to educate employees. We use a company called KnowBe4. We're really happy with it. We use it on a monthly basis to train employees, and we regularly test our employees with phishing campaigns. We do it every other month. And then we actually would know before it comes with a phishing alert button. So what people can do is if they suspect a phishing scam, they can go ahead and click on that link and it will send it to a portal for us. And the portal is called the Fish ER. And what it'll do is it'll actually look at those emails and determine, what is it? Is it a spam message? Is it a phishing attempt? Is it a clean email? So what I do is I encourage all of our employees to really, if you're suspicious of any email, even if it's spam, go ahead and report it and I'll let you know. And if you don't know, let me know that you sent it in and I'll let you know if it's good or not. I'd rather you do that than just clicking on links. So that's another thing that I use quite a bit. And that's all I had for presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Greg, I think we'll go to questions at the end.
Okay.
So hopefully I'm presenting the right screen. Okay. All right. So I'm John Danahy. I'm going to follow Greg here and try to provide some additional insight for small business owners. I think that most small business owners are at kind of a disadvantage when it comes to the technologies, where their strengths and weaknesses are, et cetera. So this presentation is hopefully designed to help address some of the questions that business owners really need to be asking of their providers or themselves, and we'll just get on with it. So I'm not sure that I'm presenting the agenda slide.
John, I think if you go up to the display settings like you did before.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, so what slide am I on? Am I on the splash slide, the initial one?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So here's the agenda. Sorry about that. For some reason, my screen's switched on me. So basically, I gave you the purpose, try to help educate small business owners and what they need to be considering, and certainly following a lot of the good advice that Greg had provided to you. I want to give you kind of an overview of what the problem space looks like. And then, in my opinion, the areas of special consideration should really be those things that business owners and managers should be asking of their IT providers, whether that's internal or external staff. The answers to a lot of these questions are really, really important, and I'll try to do a good job of explaining why. And then, of course, we'll open it up for conversation at the end. Okay, so I really want to try to explain some of the challenges with technology. Certainly want to educate business owners and, of course, identify opportunities to learn a little bit more about the technologies that we use on a day-to-day basis so they can be aware of some of the shortcomings and limitations. Okay, so the problem space. Inevitably, it starts, in my opinion, with the lack of credentialing in Massachusetts. Quite frankly, there's no licensing requirement to consider yourself an IT professional. So what ends up happening is that you don't really have a standardized program of instruction, and you don't have necessarily any experience tied to your ability to provide business with information technology support. So because of that, I think that there's an inherent risk, and really business owners should be asking the providers, what have you done in IT? How many machines have you managed? At what scale? Tell me a little bit about security. And so you really want to create kind of an interview type of environment for your providers, especially if you're contracting with some external organization. in information technology itself, there's so many specialties that it's really challenging to find someone who has a very wide knowledge base, because everybody kind of gets into technology either from a development standpoint or an infrastructure standpoint or a network perspective. So, really the amount of time that they've been working, the scope of what they've been working on is extremely important, because those skills that you learn at larger scale are relevant to every business, regardless of the size. The only thing that's different is the tools in which you would manage those activities. The last bullet, well, second to last bullet here is unknown unknowns. And, I think that most educated people would admit that, there's things that we don't know. And to the extent that we can all look in the mirror and say, this isn't the area in which I have a specific set of skills that work to my advantage, then I'd say that your better option is to outsource. And when you do outsource, you need to make sure that you're asking those good questions of the providers. And the last bullet here, just to underscore risk again, the title slide here was trust and verify. Technology can be risky, and certainly it is when it's not managed properly. So exactly following in line with the recommendations that Greg was making, firewalls are extremely important, because they do break that connection between you, potentially in your Comcast internet box or Verizon or whomever your ISP is. You want to make sure that you've got a active firewall on the network that's actually looking for suspicious files, content. You want a firewall that's actually going to go to deep packet inspection. They're going to look at every single bit that is being transferred on the wire to look for patterns and indicators that something bad is in these files that are trying to be transferred to your network. And those active firewalls will shut down that connection and prevent that malware or that bad file from getting into your environment. So just briefly here, the reason why I say it has to be a device and it has to be a third-party active firewall is that most vulnerabilities seek to leverage the operating system of the computer that you're working on, or the network device, or whatever. So if an attacker can get to the operating system, they can therefore shut off, turn on, or do anything that they want. Once they own the operating system, they have full control. So you don't want to have a firewall that's operating only in the context of the operating system, because again, if an attacker gets to the operating system, they can shut off that firewall, they can shut off that antivirus client. So you really do need to protect that network. Antivirus, VPN, again, absolute requirements. To Greg's point, if you're ever connecting a device to a public network, you want to make sure that you're doing that through a VPN connection. If you're connecting to your corporate network, depending on the size of the organization, you may be looking at VPN, or you may be looking at something like GoToMyPC, which does come with some amount of protection as well. So a lot of these solutions you don't have to break the bank with either. They're not expensive, and the value that they bring to the business is incredible, especially in the scenario where a bad link is clicked on and there's a vulnerability in one of the systems that hasn't been patched on the network. Now we're off to the races. And if you can, you think to that next step in that problem space is, getting to the backup. If the backup is only there on site and it's directly connected to the network, and it shares the same types of, the network segmentation or the user accounts that are on that device or on that network, if it can get a hold of any of that, it's off to the races. And if your only backup is on that network, it's going to become a victim as well, unless it's encrypted, right? So ransomware does not work on an encrypted file. So I always recommend to my clients to have an encrypted local copy, and then to also have an encrypted copy in the cloud, so that even in the event that something physical were to happen to the building, you'd be able to get to your data somewhere else in the world. So you can't just think of this as a technical problem. You have to think about it in terms of business continuity as well. So we talked about system updates and software updates with Greg's presentation. I agree with all of his recommendations, and I would go a bit further and suggest that more often than not, the reason why you're being prompted to install an update is for security reasons, less so for the feature enhancements. Because the way I look at it, just from a business perspective, most of these updates aren't coming because they're just good guys and they want to give us something else to use in their product. They're bound to provide updates to critical security flaws in their products, and there's a whole institution and process around how that's managed. I won't get into any of those boring details, but I can't stress enough, as Greg had, if you see an update, please apply it. And you got to make sure that it's legitimate, right? So you're not going to get an update that's sent to you by Microsoft, for instance. Click on this link to update your security problem. That's another one of those types of phishing attempts where, a malicious link is sent to you directly. And again, we're off to the races. You don't want to get into that scenario. So backup and restore, again, we touched on that. Have a copy on site so you can get back to operations quickly, have another one off site so that in the event that something does happen, either physically or logically to all of your data, you can at least resume operations somewhere else. Testing and verification, absolutely, Greg's spot on. I would add to that. I would go and look at all of my business information, and that's kind of the business continuity discussion too. Disaster recovery. What is my most important data? How do I protect that data? Are there any regulatory requirements around the management of that data? And am I complying with anything that might shake out? You have to ask those questions. The requirements with personally identifiable information, personally identifiable financial information, health information, all of this type of data, regardless of whether or not you're in the cloud, needs to be protected. So I was having a conversation a couple of months ago with a doctor who was sitting across the desk from me explaining that he was HIPAA compliant because the app that he uses is web-based and it's HIPAA compliant. And what doesn't strike the surface here is that HIPAA is not only the data, but it's also your business practices. Do you have hard copies? This isn't just an electronic problem. It's everything that we do. So just assuming that you are using a compatible or a compliant application doesn't mean that your business activities or processes are as well. So please do pay attention to that. Monitoring, again, testing and validation, you always want to go after the really important data, make sure that that mission critical data can be restored for those applications that you need in order to continue business. And you want to do that, I would say, a couple times a year at minimum, because what ends up happening is over time, we see a lot of changes to our environment, those updates that we've been talking about, things of that nature. Things come into the environment, things go out of the environment. It's always great to do more than one test a year, because you will find things that will not work anymore because of some change in your infrastructure. So it's always good to do that. Again, I talked about this briefly. Sensitive data, you need to know where it is and how it's being managed, and ask those questions. Do I have PII or financial information or health information of any of my clients or my employees, quite frankly? Because there is a legal requirement in Massachusetts that anybody that has Massachusetts resident sensitive financial information that they have a written information security plan, and it's 201 CMR 17, if I remember correctly, is the legislation on that. Although I was up at an event a couple of weeks ago in Boston for the Cybersecurity Month, and there was some discussion at that meeting that some of the politicians in the state are actually looking at our privacy legislation and looking for feedback and input. So I've got a feeling that we're going to see some new regulations coming out in Massachusetts in the coming years. Corporate and guest networks, again, same kind of thing. If you have people visiting your place of business, you want to have a guest network that's physically separated from your corporate network. You don't want to be bringing devices that you can't manage into your network because of obvious reasons. If it's not a corporate device, if it can't be managed, then if you allow a personally owned device to connect to your corporate network, that could be the vector for an attack. So please, keep those things separate. For the corporate network, you want to be changing that password on a fairly regular basis. Again, you want complexity in your passwords, and multi-factor authentication again is I think a requirement at this point. If you're administering any technology, it needs to be behind two-factor authentication at minimum. And then there's always things that you can layer on beyond that to get better. Policies and procedures. Here's where I think most small businesses struggle, is because they don't understand the policies and procedures that they need to have in place in order to manage all of this effectively. So there's HR policies that need to be considered. There's acceptable use policies for corporate assets. There's a whole bunch of things that we need to be handing our employees to set the expectation of their behavior as they use our networks. Again, I talked about having disaster and incident response plans. It's not just good enough to have the plan. You should really be exercising it at least once a year, just to make sure that procedurally everyone is familiar with what needs to happen in the event that something were to happen, because you don't want to be in a situation where you've got an incident that you've got to be figuring out how to solve that problem when you're in the middle of that crisis. It is definitely not how you want to operate. If you think back to the Colonial Pipeline situation, if you look at the mess that they made out of the public relations situation, communicating too soon, not communicating accurately, it can get pretty messy pretty quick. Having written information security plans, again, as I mentioned, the 201 CMR 17 is a piece of legislation that everyone should get familiar with. It's a simple information security plan, but you need to have it. You need to be considering the items that are in there because they're all in line with best practices. Okay, so having said that, I'm going to breathe a couple of times. Hopefully I didn't run through that too quickly, and hopefully I didn't consume too much time.
John and Greg, thank you very, very much. I think for most of us, and I'm going to speak with us as a small business, we tend to rely very heavily on our outsourced IT people to keep us safe. Is that really the smartest way to go, to actually look as a small business at somebody whose business this really is? None of us is an expert.
I don't know if Greg wants to answer that, but I'd be more than happy to give you my perspective, Rick. I think that inevitably you should be considering doing outsourced IT, because the complexity of doing this right is significant, and even at a small scale, the kinds of procedures and documentation and testing that's required. I think that you need to find somebody outside who has a broad range of experience that can talk to these things specifically. And again, that's the reason why I wanted to kind of, dive into the areas that I was talking about today, because I've seen some really bad things happen with other IT people at the helm. Just one incident, for instance, was I received a call from a public adjuster, and they had a client that was putting in a claim that was a dentist's office, and they were submitting like a $500,000 claim on data loss, and it was due to the IT provider not understanding the technologies that he was managing on their behalf. So this technology was like BitLocker in Windows 10 Professional. It ships with the product. Dell, as a manufacturer, ships with it turned on, which if you're an IT provider and you don't know to go look to make sure that BitLocker is either on or off, then you could make a mistake and not escrow that key. And what ended up happening was this IT provider effectively ransomwared his client because he didn't understand that you can't just take those drives out of that machine and put them in another machine without that key. And even Microsoft can't get that data back for you.
Well,
So I hate to suck the air out of the room. I do it all the time, but this is the kind of stuff that people need to be thinking about.
And it's a question I know, for example, Kurt Nelson, who's in the insurance industry, is in the room, and perhaps others. You talked about filing a claim. Small business has access to insurance policies against some of the challenges that they see. How does that process work on your end?
So here's that's a touchy subject with someone in the insurance industry in the room. So I'll tread cautiously here. I would say that, again, it's the informed consumer, the informed business owner, the informed business manager. You really do need to know what's in the policy. And I think that the policies these days are, of course, because of demand lately, I think that the premium is going up. It seems to be going up across the board. There are certainly things that each small business owner can do to reduce their premium. That's one of the specializations for digital tech partners. We are very well versed in all of the best practices around managing systems. So when it comes to that, we can kind of walk the client through, what are the things that you need to be doing around managing your business and your data and your systems, as well as, what content is in that policy. We'd encourage you to get a sit down with your agent or whoever the underwriting folks are, and just understand what's in that policy.
Quick question about, and Greg, I'll turn to you for this one. Both of you mentioned MFAs, multi-factor authentications. Is that similar to a two-step verification process? Is it the same as Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator? You log into something and it sends you a message via a text message for you to enter a code. Is that what we're talking about with that?
That's exactly right. Yep, that's exactly what it is. A lot of times what people do is they'll put the app on their phone and they'll get a push notification. And sometimes it'll say approve and they can just click approve. Or sometimes it will give you a one-time passcode, and then it'll give you that passcode that expires in a period of time. And you just enter that passcode and click continue. And that's all you have to do.
In our case, I think, for example, if I look at chamber staff, if we were to contact our 401k provider, for example, it is impossible for us to get directly to them without going through that two-step process. Most of us look at that as a minor inconvenience, but it's clearly a security step that's essential.
Absolutely. It's hugely important to have multi-factor authentication in any application. You can turn it on. You want to do that.
For a company that does a lot, let's say they do their QuickBooks online, they do a lot of web-based applications that help them run their business. Does that create additional vulnerabilities that have to be addressed?
Multi-factor authentication?
No, not multi-factor authentication. I shifted gears on you.
That's okay.
If you are using, say, QuickBooks Online, you're using the online version of various programs to help you run your business. Does that create greater exposure for you than having, say, QuickBooks on a PC?
I would say no. It also depends on the vendor. You really want to do your due diligence on whatever vendor you're choosing and making sure that they have appropriate security practices in place. That's a really important thing, especially with sensitive data that are sitting out in the cloud. Vetting those different vendors is important as well. John, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think that I agree with everything that Greg says, and just like the conversation around insurance, I would recommend everybody, and it's not enjoyable work. I get it, right? So it's just like those license agreements that we just kind of stumble through life clicking okay, so we could get that next app that we wanted. But the details really do kind of flesh out where the problems lie. And again, I think that that's a risk-based kind of assessment or analysis of what licensing do I have, and what assurance do I have about how they're protecting data? And again, that I'm gonna reference the regulation again in Massachusetts, but 201 CMR 17 also states that if you are compliant but your vendors aren't, you need to stop doing business with them. And they go a step further to say that, you know, you're the cognizant officer of the corporation and you should be aware of what their security posture is. So, you know, there's some legality here. There's definitely some insurance concerns. And I was raising my hand briefly. I'm just going to switch gears real quick because I do that frequently and I don't tell people before I take the turn. So I just wanted to touch one more time on the multi-factor authentication and some of these recommendations that both Greg and I have been making today. These are best practices. These are tried and true methods of preventing an unmotivated attacker from destroying your business and your livelihood, basically. Okay, so this is like good hygiene for cyber. This isn't advanced. So, you know, if you're in an industry where, you know, you have a high concentration of sensitive data, or, you know, you're doing business with the government or whatnot, you really want to make sure that you're having conversations with people that are progressively higher in that skill set, because the requirements do shift rather quickly, and everybody will. So in my experience, these best practices that we described today, anybody could poke holes at this. But what I'm going to say is, you know, you're going to take 90% or maybe 80% of the less, I would say, effective attackers off the table using these methods. So please, 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 if you don't understand anything, you can always schedule some time with me or anybody else. You know, get a second opinion, get a third opinion, educate yourself, and make sure that when you make decisions that they're informed.
Quick shift of gears to either one of you regarding passwords. You have suggested, and I think rightly so, that we change our passwords often, that we apply. In fact, now often it's required when you create a password that it have a level of sophistication beyond your first name and 1, 2, 3, 4. The challenge, of course, for almost everybody is remembering passwords. We use a program called LastPass. That is a password storage, secure storage place, and it allows us to autofill with LastPass when we're logging into things. Is that safe?
I highly recommend a password manager. LastPass is definitely considered one of the best ones. There's a lot out there. So Dashlane's another one that a lot of people use. CyberArk, Thycotic Secret Server is also another popular one. Highly recommend doing that. I've seen one too many times people putting passwords in Word documents and leaving them out on their network. So yes, I think it's really good to have some sort of a password manager and review the ones that are out there, because some of them offer different features. I know when I use Thycotic Secret Server, it had the ability to actually go in and change our passwords for us for specific service accounts. Sure. And service accounts are accounts that are created to run some sort of service in the background. And these passwords typically aren't changed for a long, long time. And I see this across the board in a lot of companies. But that's a beauty of a password manager. It can actually has the ability to go in and change it on a periodic basis for you. So absolutely.
Yes, and I would add to that, you know, if you're in a regulated industry, more than likely that should be the default for you. But you also have to understand that, again, to Greg's point and my previous point, you got to understand what they're committing to, what's in that service agreement or that license agreement. Please make sure you understand what's covered and what's not covered, because that weighs heavy into the decision that you need to make. I think that, you know, changing administrative accounts on any device really should be done in that kind of fashion. And you have to think about that tool now becomes a crown jewel for somebody who might be a little more sophisticated. So, you know, how that's being managed, who is managing it, becomes an important issue. And we haven't even talked about that yet, which is, kind of the malicious insider. That tends to look more and more these days as the more likely scenario. So, we got to be thinking in those terms as well. Some, for some amount of these types of issues, they're not coming always from the outside.
That's good advice. There was a question that Dan Sullivan asked for everybody to deal with, as to whether folks here have a written information security plan. You talked about that, John, within yours, and which would include an incident response plan, which obviously you need and hopefully never use. If the question is, if you haven't done a tabletop exercise to test out your IRP, how do you know it will save you when you need it most?
Well, I would add to that. I think it's a very good question, and it's a loaded question, and we can get into that later. But I would say that my first opinion there is to be able to point to a document that is real and has been written but not tested is infinitely better than no plan. So having the plan is key. Exercising it is more important. But if you don't have one at all, you got to start somewhere. So that's kind of in some ways, I think developing the plan is harder than actually testing it, because once you've gotten the details uncovered, it gets easier.
So, I think most of us. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, full disclosure here, I work with John. I have the great privilege of doing that in the cybersecurity space. And a couple of comments. Multi-factor authentication should be mandatory. It's easy. Everybody has a phone. Drop Google Authenticator and Microsoft Authenticator, both applications on your phone. I'll use LinkedIn as an example. You have the ability in LinkedIn to set up multi-factor. The best security is to send the code to your phone, not a text message, not SMS. So that's just simple. Do that for everything. Then the password becomes less of an issue. All of those requirements. Second thing there is, I think it's 3 trillion instructions per second. And there's a chart that we could send you. It's called the password cracker. So the cyber criminals have programs that they run, and when they're doing 3 trillion instructions per second, it'll show you how fast they can crack a password based on the makeup of the password. So that's that. But all that being said, MFA neutralizes that, the weakness of the password crack. So very important to do that. Second thing is a risk assessment. We've done a risk assessment for a company that has a managed service provider. A risk assessment includes, it's a 68-page report that comes out of that, very detailed. And what comes out of that is a detailed interview and documentation of the managed service provider. Are they encrypting data in transit? Are they encrypting your data when it's at rest in the cloud? All of these things come out of a risk assessment. So you don't know what your risk is until you assess it. And one of the outcomes of that is reduced premiums. As an old insurance VP once told me years ago, Sully, we don't do insurance. We do loss prevention. Ours, not yours. So you can actually, if you identify your risk, you can mitigate it. And number 2, you can actually reduce your cybersecurity policy premium because you've identified your risk. So a risk assessment is fundamental to your business. And I will stand down from the podium.
Thank you very much, Dan. A question I have kind of in general, most of us spend a lot of time on public networks. We are going to restaurants, we're looking at QR codes, we're downloading the menus. Are we creating vulnerabilities for ourselves when we do that?
Okay, so I'm going to suck the air out of the room again, I guess. So It's very common. So there's a number of problems that happen when you have a device that you connect to your corporate network, right? So any other public network that you've attached to, those connections especially. So I'll give you one of my examples, right? It's very easy to set our phones up to say, hey, join open networks automatically. So you're walking around, you got your cell phone in your pocket, you've got great reception, you can make calls anywhere in the city, life is good. But what you don't know is what networks you're traversing as you're walking through your life each day. And if there isn't like an anti-malware client on that phone, or if there isn't a VPN connection being established, then anybody could legitimately attach to your wireless device, whether that's a tablet or a cell phone. And now it's, like I said, off to the races. Maybe not right now, maybe not until you step into the building at work and you join to that work network automatically, and then bad things start happening. So the other issue that becomes that's more obvious, I think, is like the hacker sitting there at Dunkin' Donuts, just stripping every keystroke you have across to the wireless router and out over the internet. So that's just a simple hack. What I'm talking about on the mobile device side of the fence is more of a, that there's a financial motivation there. And there is one for the Dunkin' Donuts scenario as well, right? I can sit there and just take the data stream as it's going back and forth to the internet, and then I can parse out numbers, specific sets of numbers that I'm looking for. And, if you're sitting there, having your coffee, ordering something online, and you were doing it through a browser on that cell phone, then in theory, I could have your passwords, I could have your credit card numbers, I could have just about anything you put on the wire. That's why the VPN that's why the VPN client is so important with public networks like that.
Yeah, it's like brushing your teeth in the morning. When you're in an unsecured network, you fire up the VPN on your phone or your laptop, and that encrypts. That's a tunnel, an encryption tunnel for the data that's traveling, so no one can steal it. So that's like you always do that. Whenever I'm in an unsecured network, like I take my cousin to the hospital for the wound care center. It's an unsecured network. I fire up my VPN and I'm good to go. So that's just something you should do every time, all the time.
Do all of these phones come with VPNs available for use, or is it something else that you have to download?
You have to get it. Yeah. They're not built. They're not built into the operating system of the phones. So.
And again, and like Greg's point earlier in his presentation, you want to get one that's commercially accepted. You want something that a major company is standing behind, because there's so many freeware malware distributors on the internet, right? So the two things I wouldn't do is go after the freeware antivirus or the freeware performance improvement application to get better performance out of your PC. Don't download either one of those types of utilities ever, because that all they do is they sell your information to marketers who bother you on Google when you're searching things on the internet.
We've reached the end of our questions. If there are any other questions for the group, they can certainly unmute themselves and ask. Guys, this is sobering. Obviously, we need to do what we can to protect ourselves. We need to do what we can to be certain that as we use our devices, whether it's at the office or otherwise, when we use our devices, that we have the proper protections. Kurt Nelson, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. John and Dan and Greg. So I use a secure email program called EM4 Paperclip. Do you know anything about these secure email vendors?
So I would say that it does depend on what kind of data we're talking about. I think that I would certainly look for some sort of third-party certification of the provider for, transferring that type of data. I'd look for either an industry association's, endorsement, some sort of government, watchdog organization saying that they've blessed this. They're not going to endorse it, but it might be an acceptable thing according to their standard, or there might be a third-party certification program that would give them the kind of credentialing that you would need in order to be sure that the data that you're transferring is being done properly.
The other question is, with the WISP, am I correct that it had to be updated every year, or once you wrote it, you were all set?
Well, a plan that never gets updated is probably more valuable than a plan that hasn't been created. I don't know that there's necessarily a legal stipulation. I believe that what's written in there is that there should be a periodic review, but I don't know that there's a prescription as far as the time frame. There is a prescription. One of the things that set me back in that legislation was they actually mentioned by technology a requirement for there to be a firewall for this type of mass resident data. So, again, some people can get creative and say, well, I've got it on my Microsoft system, or I have it on my Mac, so I'm good to go. And that probably doesn't meet the intent of the policy.
I spent, John mentioned the event in Boston with the state legislators. That's really what it was. And I spent some time and have talked with them since with a legislative aide who's working on the policy. Right now they're working on budget, but the next up is they're going to take the 201 CMR 17 legislation and enable it. I suggested they do it through the Office of Consumer Affairs, which does business regulation.
Oh, we lost you, Sully. Somebody gave him the electronic hook.
Not I.
It wasn't me either.
Oh,
My hands are not on the keyboard.
to have that power.
That stinks.
But he wasn't actually muted, so something must have happened on his end.
Yeah,
I don't think he can hear us either because.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost you, Dan. Okay. Well,
Or Dan.
yes.
Well, in any event, gentlemen.
Looks like
thank
Kurt
you.
has his hand up.
Yeah, I did have another question.
Sure.
So we don't secure any personal information on our two PCs in my office. But when we send an email, it has PI in it. Is that now somehow on my computer now?
So I'm going to give you the answer that used to drive me crazy at MITRE. It depends. If it's being scanned and that scanned file is being delivered to your computer, for instance, to like a share or something like that, and then you select that file to be uploaded to the secure email server or whatnot, I would say at that point in time, yes, your machine is now subject to the information security plan.
Right. If I scan something and save it on the computer,
Yes.
but if I just send it right from the scanner out to the secure email, my scanning program allows.
Yeah,
to
so
do
I
that.
would be cautious with that too, because the scanner now becomes, so the scanner has memory, the scanner has potentially a hard drive or memory. So the device actually is now, storing that kind of data as well.
Even though I've deleted it after I send the email, it could still be there somehow.
It could be recoverable from whatever media is storing the data. Now, again, that we could take this to the nth degree, and I would just say, we need to understand if that data isn't, encrypted at rest on that device, then yes, you are exposed.
Okay. In order for a bad guy to use it, they'd have to gain access.
Have to be pretty sophisticated. But again, if I can get if I can get to the Comcast router, if I can get to your machine on the other side of the Comcast router, then I can get to anything on your network. And that's the basic principle. That's
How
why
do you
we
know I
want to make
use
sure.
Comcast?
The majority of small business owners, I think,
Are
in
you-
Massachusetts are on Comcast, and I
Are you
see
trying to get into my computer?
I see it every day, unfortunately. So you know, my opinion is most of these ISPs really haven't been talking about security for a long, long time, which makes me wonder, you know, why is it now all of a sudden an imperative for you? You know, so if you weren't thinking about security 10 years ago, why are you trying to sell it to me now? You know, and in other organizations that I've worked, you know, our mentality or our philosophy was we have to assume that the bad guys are here, and what do we do to keep them from getting to the really important stuff? And that, I think, is a sobering thought for everyone to take away. Is assume that they're already there. Now, what do you do about protecting the really important stuff?
John, Greg, this has been sobering and also extraordinarily helpful. I believe Mike and I are going to have a discussion internally as to whether we move back to stone tablets as our way of communicating. But I can tell you that for every small business, there are exposures. And it's important that they do the work and the investment, quite frankly, in expertise if they lack that expertise themselves. A lot of these things are not intuitive. A lot of them are not self-evident, and it's very difficult to catch up with the bad guys because the bad guys are always looking at ways that they can get into our information. Sad but true. So, Greg, thank you very much for your incredible information. John, for yours. Dan, for your input as well. Thank you very, very much. And of course, thank you to Bank 5 for sponsoring the series.
Thank you.
Kurt, did you have one more to add?
Yeah, so John, you are a consultant for small businesses in this area?
Yes.
Okay. So Mike and Rick, can you get his information out?
We sure can.
Okay. And it's a shame there's only 12 of us on this call because this information is so valuable, such a
It
great
is.
presentation. And we know that the majority of our members aren't paying attention to this at all.
They will when something bad happens, unfortunately.
Yeah. Maybe we
So
can have
much-
these gentlemen back again sometime.
It's so much more expensive after the fact, that I can assure you.
Exactly.
And in so many ways you can't even calculate, right? Just the I try to describe it as that sensation. If you've ever been in an automobile accident and you know it's inevitable, I mean, you know, time just almost stands still for that moment in time when you realize, oh my God, the worst possible thing that could happen right now just happened. That sensation that you have before that impact is exactly what it feels like when something really bad happens. And that's not the time to be figuring out what to do. I can assure you all for that.
Pardon my language. We used to call those OCMs. They were oh crap moments. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much. Thanks again to Bank 5. This was remarkably useful, and we will record this and, of course, get the information out. So thank you very, very much for your time and effort.
Thank you.